Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about speaker roles. So, part of that conversation will be going over the structure that each speech should take, as well as the important things that need to happen underneath that structure. Note going forward, I'm going to upload templates on the drive for each speaker role and each part of each speech, practically. And I want you guys to follow those templates religiously, as in, I don't want you writing your speeches on pages. I want you to be writing on those templates. So, up until I can see that as a squad, we have clear structure, we are going to write all of our speeches on those templates. Yeah, so the presentation was prepared by myself and Suvasha. So yeah, just as a note, if you hear any screaming or any like strange things happening in the background, it's don't pay attention to it. Just don't pay attention to it. Cool. So here are the things we're going to cover in this particular video. Firstly, we're going to be covering speaker roles, as we've already discussed. We're going to cover issue-based rebuttal and how it should be done. Then we're going to cover impacting, because I think that's something that the entire squad is having issues with. In addition to that, I'm also going to do a bit of work to cover introductions and how they should work. Yeah. So then here are some valuable notes for interacting with the video so that you guys know what's coming forward in terms of questions you may have. So this is just meant to function as an overview of speaker roles and how they're intended to function. A lot of the specifics within each speaker role are going to be covered in better detail in like videos that are going to come later under the debate strategy subject. So for example, how to construct a context will be more adequately covered when we look at case construction. You know, when to use a criteria, how to use a criteria, how to formulate your burden. Those are all things that are going to be covered when we do case construction a lot better. This video is just meant to give you that meta structure of how each speech is meant to function and the different things that have to be included in each speech. Of course, we're also going to be having a rebuttal session later on, and we're going to be having an argumentation session that's going to give you a lot more details as to how you should structure your arguments and how to analyze them a lot better. Then from there, we're also going to be going into a lot more detail with rebuttal in terms of what are the different responses you can give to arguments and so forth. But here we're just going to go over how to construct an issue-based rebuttal as far as identifying your issues. And yeah, we're also going to have a style session later. It's not itinerarized and it's not on the curriculum, but it's going to be a live session. We're going to have a live style session where we go over what you guys should be doing to improve your style. But because we're going to be going over introductions here, a bit of it is going to be covered. And of course, during feedback, you're also going to get a lot of style feedback that's going to be covered as well. Cool. Before we get into each speech, I want to go over some key things that have to be practiced for all speaker roles. So the first one is that introductions should always be concise and effective. So they can do one of the following three things. They can make an impactful statement with respect to your case. They can point out strategic flaws of the other team, and they can highlight what the debate is about. That's the first thing. In the next slide, I'll also go into a bit more detail about the different types of introductions you can have. But functionally, these are three things that introductions can do. In addition to that, irrespective of the speech you are giving, it is of paramount importance that you are signposting. What we mean by signposting is that you are telling me where you are at that point in time. If you're in first, I want to know, here's our burden of proof. Or if you want to phrase it in a more logically flowing way, here's what we're going to prove to you in this debate. My case split is as follows. Or, here are the arguments that are going to come from our team. Then from there getting into now moving on to my context. And then from there, here's my first argument on X, Y, and Z. So at any and every given point in time, I have to know where you are as an adjudicator so that I can follow you to the best of my ability. Cool. All right. Then from there, let's talk about constructing those good introductions. So the first thing we have to understand is that a speech is a speech, irrespective of whether you're doing debating, Toastmasters, public speaking, whether or not you're doing a speech in class, for example, for English marks, which then means that introductions are important no matter where you are. So make sure that your speeches are having introductions. And the way that you construct an introduction for a debate speech could be very similar to how you construct introductions for all sorts of speeches. So they can take three forms as well. Firstly, is that it can just be you stating the crux of your case, not just stating it, but just giving me a well-interpreted understanding of what you're going to bring forward in the debate. An example of this would be if the debate is about legalizing marijuana, just giving me something along the lines of, panel, a drug that has no reasonable harm to society and no harm to me should not be a drug that's taken away from my daily life. Something along those lines. I don't know, I just came at the top of my head, but that's not the best kind of introduction that I would want to do. But that's just giving you an example of you stating the crux of your case in your introduction. Cool. And then you could either also have an introduction where you provide an example that substantiates your case. These first two are most so specific to speeches that are substantive in nature. So your proposition 1 or your proposition 2 speeches. But mostly I would, not even just proposition 1, just one with speakers 1 and 2, but I'd mostly keep this to your first speeches, at least these first two, not necessarily use them in the second and third speeches for reasons I'm going to explain in a second. Then from there, provide another or a third kind of example, introduction you can have is one that provides a response to the most important thing in the debate at that point in time. So I would prefer these for the second and the third speeches, because the one thing we always need to show in a debate is that we are being adaptive. So if you are giving me introductions that reflect where we are in the debate, i.e. they're responding to the most important thing at that point in time, that is showing that you are adaptive in how you approach debates and how you should be speaking. So you guys already do this to a reasonable degree, but the one main thing I want to drive home with introductions is that it is not the form that it takes that is the most important thing, but it is rather how it is constructed. Introductions need to be intelligently constructed using language devices and word economy. What I mean by that is language devices go back to the English that you're being taught in schools. Using your metaphors, using your alliterations, using your similes in introductions makes them sound more impactful, or just arranging words in a way that create a particular effect or impact is important. It's really, really important to your introductions. And by word economy, I mean, don't add a lot of clutter to your introductions. Keep literally all the words have to be the words that are important. If you feel like there's a word that is in your introduction and doesn't alter or doesn't do anything for the definition, like if you remove it, your introduction won't change meaning, remove it. We only need the most important word and the most precise phrasing for those introductions. What I would recommend for everyone, don't think of your introduction when you stand up and when you're about to speak. It's not a by the way thing. The first impression to the judge is an incredibly important thing. I remember, I think one of the current SAA head coaches, Pierre, once said that your speaker score either goes 2 up or 2 down after your introduction. So that first impression is very pivotal to the impact that you leave in the debate. So make sure that your introductions are well constructed. Maybe later on, we might even do a separate session on introductions altogether. But yeah, now we can finally start heading into the different speaker roles. So proposition 1. So for proposition 1, it's a super simple structure. You have your formalities that include your definition, your burden of proof, your policy, and of course your case split. Then you move to your context. After your context, you move to your argument, or however many arguments you have in the debate. So let's go into each of these things and see what they mean. First things first, definition. This is you defining any and all important terms in the debate. So those are the words that otherwise could be contentious or words that are pivotal to your case. So in the debate that I adjudicated last week about this house would criminalize adultery, the definition of adultery, which again seems like such a simple thing, but the definition of adultery became space where a lot of unnecessary argumentation was had. Whereas there was the definition of it being exclusively sexual relations when you're in a relationship, other people were saying, it's emotional cheating as well, and so many other different things. So defining the important words is valuable for how the debate progresses. So make sure that you're doing that from the get-go. Cool. Some of it could be dictionary definitions. Some of it could be, definitions that are very specific to how you want to frame the debate. And there's a really beautiful example here that's given, which is this house regrets the glorification of hard work. So in this case, you would have to define what glorification looks like. You'd have to define what hard work looks like. You see how hard work seems like a super subjective thing, and you are more likely to have a very subjective definition of what it means if you're in proposition, but in the same breath, there's somewhat of an objective definition of what glorification is that could be akin to what dictionaries could say, and you could just give examples about what glorification looks like thereof. Cool. Then from there, but I think definitions are simple. I don't think we should be fighting over definitions at this stage, nor should I have to do an extensive amount of coaching to explain how definitions work. But judging from this house would criminalize adultery, it might just be a necessary conversation for us to have. Yeah, then from there we move to your burden of proof. Note, your burden of proof and your case split and your side are three different things. Please, let's stop conflating them. So your burden of proof is what you as a team are going to prove in the debate. It is very... Yo, the chickens are trapping outside, guys. But yeah, your burden of proof is very different from, say, for example, your case split, right? Because your case split are the arguments you're going to use to prove that burden of proof. Then your side is whether or not you are supporting the motion or against the motion. Why am I stating these three things? Firstly, I think a lot of people use the burden of proof and they just rephrase the motion. So if it's this house with banned school uniform, you guys are like, my burden of proof is, I'm going to prove that, banning school uniform will have positive outcomes. Yeah, dog, you're in prop. Of course you're meant to do that, So from there, a burden of proof is intended to be the route you take to proving your side in the debate, right? Think of it like a court case, right? If you're going to court and you're someone's lawyer, your one main aim is to prove that that person is going to be that person shouldn't go to jail. That's your side. You have to prove that that person shouldn't go to jail if they murdered someone. Your burden of proof, the route you take to do that could either be you saying that they didn't kill the person at all, or they're completely innocent, or saying that they did, but they did it in self-defense, or saying that they did, however, they have a severe mental illness that made them do this. You see how all three of those things are ways or approaches you can have to proving that someone shouldn't go to jail because that's your side, but they're each very different and they're each very unique in how they function. So that is how a burden of proof is. It is a unique route you are taking to prove your side of the debate. Then your case split would be subsequently the arguments you're going to use to prove your burden of proof. Cool. Two birds, one stone. I've also gone over case split. Then from there, there's your context. So as a first speaker, you need to set the foundation for the debate in terms of defining all the things, not just defining, but explaining to me the story of the debate and explaining all the things that are important, right? What context is you firstly clearing up anything that could otherwise be misunderstood or is necessary for the debate to happen. So in the example that was given, for example, it's this house would establish an independent state for women. Immediately, I want to know, what is the state for women going to look like? What is, what is the state going to consist of? How is the state going to be formed? All of those things. So I want to know, what is it going to look like? That's the first thing that has to be in context. But the one main thing I want to push as context before we go into a more in-depth session that will explain it a lot better is two primary things in context. Number one, providing me with a clear picture of everything you are defending and fighting for in the debate. Secondly, answering the question of why are we having the debate, right? Means giving me any information about any current topics that are important to the debate and so forth. So if the motion again is this house would establish an independent state for women, my context would be around the high rate of femicide or gender-based violence in the world, and how this particular high rate of gender-based violence and femicide in the world, and how, you know, there's now a necessity for women to exist in safe spaces, right? Therefore, this motion was introduced. So those are some basic things that I'd maybe want to cover or set up in my context if I was given the motion, South would establish an independent state for women. So it's super important that you set up your context, because it is the story of the debate. It is the story that you want to push forward. So, let me just, yeah. So going back to what the debate, or going back to what context is. Nice and simple, it is answering two questions. Number one, clearing up the necessary things in the debate in terms of what you support. Secondly, answering the question of why are we having this debate. Then you move on to a substantive matter where you're giving me the points that support your side of the case. Formalities that I missed was a policy which applies to debates that are generally around implementation. But when we do case construction, we'll go into greater detail about policies and how they work. Cool. Then moving on to your opposition one. I don't think your opposition one is drastically different from your proposition one, but it serves many different and important functions. So, like within your proposition one, you will have your formalities, which would be your clash or your burden of proof, which very much operates the same way as it did in proposition. So I'm not going to, spend a lot of time re-explaining that and how it works. Then from there, you can redefine the motion only if it's absolutely necessary. Like if the definition that proposition sets up is just ridiculous and uncharitable to the debate, then you can redefine the motion. Or if they just have the wrong definition entirely, sure, you can redefine the motion after that. But yeah, make sure that those are the only times, and you don't launch a definitional challenge for no reason. If you want to have a counter policy, you can also set up a counter policy as well, where you give an alternative for the debate and show me how you are going to achieve whatever that alternative is through your own step and process. Because basically that's what a policy is. It is a set of steps that you are going to take to achieve whatever you want to achieve in the debate. So yeah. Then from there, you do your case split, which is usual, and then you do your rebuttal. Your rebuttal here is you're responding to the strategic flaws of the other team, you're responding to the main argument that came from the other team, and you're responding to their setup. That's basically what needs to happen within your rebuttal. You don't need to do an extensive amount of it, just do enough to refute whatever's happening on the other side, or refute the proposition one speech. Then from there, you do your context. So in op one, it's also important to do context. What you'll notice is that context is going to be present in a wide variety of speeches, not just your first speeches. But here you need to do context to set up where your side of the debate is coming from, right? So here you recontextualize the debate in your favor, or you give me any piece of information that the proposition may have missed out that you think is important for your debate in order for it to happen. Cool. That is how context is intended to function. Then from there, you move on to your argumentation. Cool. All right. Now we can officially move on to our second speeches, proposition 2. So the reason why I'm doing it side by side for the P1s, the O1s, P2s, and O2s is because I think there are some nuances in how you should approach each speaker role. So you'll find that very few of you guys will be doing both P1s and O1s, or, both P3 and an O3. There'll be scenarios where that's done. It just won't be majority of the time. Okay, cool. So for proposition 2, I want, again, first thing, you'll have your introduction as per usual. After your introduction, recontextualization of the debate. Remember, opposition did a recontextualization where they might have probably changed your context and they said, no, it's actually about this. So in your recontextualization, you need to reaffirm your own context and refute the context that's been brought up by opposition one. That's what needs to happen in your recontextualization as a proposition two. Then from there, make the recontextualization extend from what your proposition one already spoke about. So that would be how the recontextualization works. After that, you move to your rebuttal. This is where rebuttal needs to be a bit more extensive, respond to two things. Number one, you're doing defensive rebuttal against the responses that were given to the proposition one speech. And then you are doing offensive rebuttal to respond to whatever the other team has already said. So what you're going to do here is have an issue-based rebuttal, and we'll talk about how that's going to work in a second, but you're going to work to respond to every single thing that's coming up from the proposition, from the opposition team. I would say roughly context and rebuttal together should last about 4 minutes, at most push it to 5 minutes, but 4 minutes is where I think all of that should be. Then 4 minutes for you to provide me with a new argument, provide me with argumentation, and provide me with ideas in that proposition 2 speech. That's what I'm expecting from a prop 2. Cool. Then opposition 2, similar structure, different prioritizations. So we'll talk about why in a second. So the first thing is that you also need to have a context that refutes, again, builds on the context that your O1 gave me, but refutes the context that P1 and P2 have already given me. As you guys are noticing now, something important happens in debates that are of a higher level. There are two debates that are happening at once. You are arguing over substantively what is important, and you are arguing over what is the right context that the debate needs to happen in. Both of these things are important in determining who wins and loses a debate. That's why even in O2, you still need to be focusing on recontextualization and rehashing and fighting the context that the prop team had already set up. So that's what's going to be happening in your context. Obviously, you're going to have an introduction as well. Thereafter, after that, you'll move into your rebuttal. The rebuttal for an O2 needs to be a lot more extensive than, a prop 2 or any speech before that. Generally, what I tell the school teams that I coach, and this is a lot, I phrase it very simply for them, but I say that I don't want to hear your argument until you are done responding to everything that's come from your P1 and P2, if you're in opposition to. That's what I generally tell them. But for you guys, I advise a lot more discretion. So respond to everything that comes in the first and second speeches, but some of it also has to be integrated as, It has to be integrated as into your matter, basically. So respond as much as you can. And if you're prioritizing rebuttal, for example, say you give me 5 minutes of recontextualization and rebuttal, or 5:30 of recontextualization and rebuttal, and you only have about 2 minutes to give me, or 2.5 minutes to give me your argument, although I wouldn't recommend that in cases where it's necessary, it's fine for you to do it, right? What is important is that by the end of that O2, I want the prop case to be done, dusted, finished, and over for. You definitely need to extend on your own case as well, but majority of my interest is in making sure that you do enough to refute the other team's case. So make sure that that is happening and that's coming through. So yeah, and then from there you move on to your substantive matter where you give your argument for the debate. The second speech shouldn't need to be a third speech where you're just doing rebuttal the whole time, but focus it on doing the responsive work, then coming and doing the argumentative work secondary to that. I think for me that's that's the distinction between a P2 and an O2. It is not structure, it is the prioritization. In P2, you are prioritizing extending your case through having more argumentation. In O2, you are prioritizing responsive work. That's the distinction between the two. Cool. Then from there, we move on to the third speeches, right? And the structure for third speeches relatively not a complicated one. So you have your introduction, you have your strategic flaws, or your strategic reframing, your issue-based rebuttal, then the conclusion. We're gonna like just going over what each of these things mean and how they function. Introduction, I want you to give me a clear idea of what the debate has been about at that particular throughout the debate, and what is it about at this particular point in time. Then from there, if there are any strategic flaws that are made by the other team, or any strategic reframing that you need to do, then you do it there. Separate chat will have a conversation about what strategic rebuttal and strategic flaws actually are. Not just you guys giving me random responses that are already there, but reframing the debate strategically and doing the strategic flaws. You do that, then you move on to your issue-based rebuttal, then you conclude your speech. We're going to go into more information about what that means in a second. Proposition 3, your role is essentially to rebut anything and everything brought up by the opposition. You want to reinforce your burden of proof, and obviously doing the even if rebuttal and everything in between is all important. But what becomes the most important by the third speeches is doing the comparative work between the two cases. So whether you're in Proposition 3 or Opposition 3, you have to be doing the comparatives between the two cases. What is a comparative? You comparing your case and the other team's case and showing me the differences between the two and why those differences warrant you winning the debate. Cool. Then from there, we move to reply speeches. Replies need to be issue-based as well, right? You have to show impact and strategic value of each point in the debate. So, in short, a reply speech is basically like a summary of the debate as a whole, but it's not just you like giving me a random summary or you giving me a third speech where you're responding to everything that's done. You are giving me a biased summary of why your team is going to win the debate. So, the way that you do that, generally speaking, is what are the most important issues of the debate, and through doing the comparatives between those two teams on those issues, who then wins the debate. How you can shift debates using reply speeches is through doing that comparative analytical work of who achieves more in each department. That's the first way. Second one is showing me strategic impacts that we might have not seen before in the debate. So for example, you guys saying X, Y, and Z has implications X, Y, and Z on the debate. You know what I mean? So we'll talk about that a bit more when we do strategic impacting. But the two things that are important there is you guys doing the comparative work, grouping it into issues, and not doing direct argumentative rebuttal. It is you grouping it into issues, showing me who won each issue, and then showing strategic impact of those issues in the debate. That's how you sway debate in your reply speech. Not necessarily, I don't think you can largely sway it, but I think it can be reasonably swayed by a reply speech. Cool. Then from there, let's actually talk about what an issue-based reply or issue-based rebuttal looks like. So the structure is as follows. You identify the core questions or core conversations or clashes in the debate. However you want to do it. If you want to go questions, that's fine. I prefer using questions because it makes the introductions or it makes the conclusions much easier, because then the conclusion is just the comparative answer to my question. So if my issue is, do we think that, something is legitimate? My conclusion is, on the comparative, we do a better job at showing you why this is a legitimate thing to do. After, of course, I've done the comparative, that's my conclusion. So the first step is identifying the core question, and then underneath each core question, you provide a response. You say what the other team said, and you provide a response. Then you are showing me the impact of those responses. Once you've shown me the impact of those responses, you are concluding the issue. This is all happening per issue. So this is the structure that needs to happen. Issue, after giving me the issue, which is the core question or the clash. Again, I'm using the words core question, issue, and clash interchangeably. You show me the issue, Then from there, what did the other team say? You respond to that. You show me the impact of your response. You move to the next response, do the same thing. Then you give me a comparative at the end, and that's the conclusion of that issue. Move to your next issue, do the exact same thing again. Cool. Then from there, how do you identify issues? And I have something called the decision-making model. I think as you grow in debating, it becomes more intuitive how you should identify them. But for starters, I think the decision-making model is a good starting point for where to go. So what that is, or what I think about it is that for every decision we make, we can only make decisions for two reasons. Number one, because it produces a positive consequence. Secondly, because it is the morally right thing to do. I, for example, wouldn't kill a person because I just don't think murder is a morally correct thing. I wake up and I coach debating because it makes me happy. That's a positive consequence. Any and every conversation or any and every decision comes down to those two things. So from the get-go, we can structure our issues using those two things. The more you get better, the more you can use your discretion to decide when it's not those two issues and grouping it in other ways. But for starters, that is a way you can start identifying your issue-based rebuttal, right? So as it says here, there's a consequential and a moral element to it. And I give you an example here about this house as the medical community would adopt an optimistic stance towards vaccines that are rolled out despite having incomplete data. Then, from there, give you your core questions about that. Cool. Now, an interesting conversation we've been waiting for, which is what is impacting? Don't impact and then give me an argument or a random response. Impacting is showing me how your responses or argument affect the debate. So that's when debating becomes a bit meta and you're breaking the fourth wall and you're applying your critical thinking to how things work. So what I mean when you say you are showing how your responses affect the debate, it can be either you showing how your response damages the other team's case, right? So in my case, it can take the example of, let's say we're talking about, what is it? Yep, this house would ban, or this house would this house would institute the death penalty, right? And I give an entire case about how the death penalty is incredibly effective. My entire case is showing you that the death penalty is effective in reducing the crime rate. Then opposition comes up and they say, hey, actually, here are statistics and data that show that areas where the death penalty has been implemented didn't actually reduce the crime rate by any reasonable way. Secondly, it's only applicable to a small minority of crimes. Therefore, it's not going to work for majority of the crimes that we actually need the death penalty for. The impact and strategic value of that response is, number one, it shows that proposition's burden is wrong in that they are not proving that the death penalty is effective because we've already shown you that it's not going to be effective. Secondly, it breaks down and degenerates the entirety of their argumentation. Should they still desire to win this debate, they need to come back and show us why, despite everything we've told you, it's still going to be effective. So, as a starter pack, that's what I want you guys to be doing for impacting. Showing me what damage is it having to the other team's case. Or the alternate, if you're giving an argument, showing me what benefit it has to your case or how it helps you in proving your case in the debate. Cool. Fundamentally, that is what impacting is, and it's getting loud. And that is what today's session is about in terms of speaker roles. If you have any questions, feel free to ask your coaches, feel free to ask me, and I'm more than fine to have that discussion with you. If you feel like anything I'm saying is wrong or you want to correct me, also feel free to have that discussion with me. You're debaters, I'm a debater. I just happen to be older. That doesn't mean that I know everything. So, yeah. Have a great day. And we're not going to be having quizzes for the debate strategy course. It's mostly going to be practical work, so I might ask you to do one or two things via assignments, or if not for that, it could be doing practical work during the Sunday sessions. But yeah, that's just about it.